Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. This is the Aspen City Council work session for August 22nd, 2022. On tonight's agenda, we have the Burlingame Child Center design concept and the West End traffic study results. And we are going to actually start in order, so we've got Burlingame first.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Hello, Council. Let me just share my screen to get us started. And I need to look at my glasses. Oh. Sorry. Ooh, what's going on?
Wow, it's quiet.
All right. There you go.
While Jen's finishing setting up, I'm going to jump in here on a couple things. First, this is continuing to be a high priority for the council as you established in your goals and several different facets of it working at the same time. Tonight, we have two design concepts that we're going to see if there's a preferred alternative or if there's a different direction altogether the council would like to go. Additionally, since we initially published this memo, we also received some pricing on construction, which I don't know, Jen, did you update your presentation with it?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And we've been using that updated information to model the Kids First Fund over some competing priorities within the fund. The increase of new construction, as well as ongoing work that staff's been doing with the Kids First Advisory Board to look at wages and housing for this particular population. We're going to come back to you on September 19th on the wages and housing piece in more detail as part of your goal update. What I would encourage the council to do is if you're able to choose one of these design concepts tonight, it would be extremely helpful. And we take this project to 100% schematic design and have another check-in with you about whether we should proceed any further right now until you have that information about both the fund health, our recommendations in the budget about the split between affordable housing and childcare on the sales tax, as well as having a chance to see the proposal we've been working on between staff and the Kids First Board on wages and housing. So I think those are some missing elements that were really important. I just don't want to lose all of this work up to this point in community involvement if we were to not get to 100% schematic so that we had some clear direction when it's time to pick it back up again, if you will, if you don't want us to go to entitlements here in 2023. All right, and with that, I'll turn it over to Jen.
Well, thank you, Sarah. She summed up a bunch of it. My name's Jen Phelan. I'm the development manager in the asset department. And as Sarah mentioned, we'll be talking about the Burlingame Early Childhood Education Center, and what we want to do is review design concepts tonight.
Jen, can you pull the microphone closer?
Thank you. Okay. So tonight's request of council, as Sarah mentioned, is we want to just discuss the progression of the design concepts for the what we'll call the ECE Center. And we're going to be looking for some feedback tonight. I just want to give some background. I know council might be familiar, but for people watching in the audience or from home who might not know much, just want to talk a little bit about background. So Burlingame, the Burlingame Child Care Center progresses a critical council goal to increase child care capacity along with some other initiatives that council is working on and staff. We had a RFP process where we asked for proposals on developing 3 parcels in the Burlingame subdivision. Land and Shelter was selected to design the center. And as I mentioned, there's 3 parcels. Parcel A is the largest, and we also asked the team to look at lot 3 and 4, which is currently entitled to develop with a single family home on each in Burlingame, but to look at the entire land area for the potential of developing this child care center and for the potential of including housing. So the site acreage is about just over an acre. And the property is bounded on 2 sides by Harmony Road and then Pepke Road, which is being developed as part of stage 3 of Burlingame. Okay. Just a little bit more background. Once we selected the design team, we created an executive committee comprised of city staff and mostly Kids First staffers, some leadership staff, and we were asked to work with the consultants to develop the ideal programming for the daycare. Once that was developed, we subsequently created what we called a design advisory group, and basically a broader group of people with different talents and talents such as we have people who are in landscaping, other people in the childcare industry. We have some people in construction. So we were trying to get a bunch of different perspectives to be able to weigh in on the design as it progressed forward. So this ideal programming that the ECE, the Executive Committee, and the designers came up with includes 7 classrooms, a gross motor room, administration space, entry requirements and circulation, storage and support space, as well as outdoor play areas. The Executive Committee suggested that they had a preference for multiple housing units on the site. And we also started some outreach, definitely emphasizing Burlingame as we were looking at putting this, developing this in the subdivision. So we've had 4, I'd say, open houses with Burlingame since September of 2021. We also have done a community survey via Aspen Community Voice, and then there were questions in the 2022 community survey that discussed childcare in the city. And so there's been multiple iterations of ideas for this, and we've refined it down to 2, which we'll just call hillside and street side.
You have a question there?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is a gross motor room a gymnasium? Is it indoor recreation area? I mean, what is a, yeah, okay. Thank you.
It can also be used for other meetings, like, it could be used for community meetings or anything that the Burlingame community could want to use as well. So it could be an indoor play area when the weather doesn't allow kids to go outside, or there could be other, parent educational courses, or the community could use it for other
Okay.
purposes.
Thank you. It was not well defined.
He was able to inform me on what that was.
Well, I didn't have the same resources you do.
All right.
Thank you.
And so, as I mentioned, we have had some outreach with the residents, and also through the 2022 survey and Aspen Community Voice. The 2022 community survey said that expanding childcare capacity, increasing the number of spaces available for children and infants was important. And we also had some key themes, I'd say, that we've heard from the neighbors, which we want to be able to address, which, I'd say concern-wise, we've heard parking and traffic, staffing of the facility, and then prioritization of resident children in Burlingame being able to attend. So those are some of the ideas that, or comments we've heard from the neighbors. We've also, with the open houses, we've gathered input on concepts. So we had lots of poster boards, we had the architects there, we had a transportation consultant at one of the open houses so that people could come and ask questions and have people to be able to answer their concerns and give ideas on what's important for a child care center in the neighborhood. So the 2 concepts, the first one I'll talk about is hillside. What this does is there is some topography on the site, that parcel C, right when you come in along Harmony Road. And so this design places the ECE Center solely on parcel C, and kind of at the very tip of parcel C, as you can see in the slide. And then you drive a bit further around the building. You'd come into a surface parking area, and the housing what they'd be looking at is 4 affordable housing units that would be placed on the 2 residential lots. So you'd have some separation of both the child care center and the housing. The second design concept was an integrated design concept where the affordable housing and the child care center were in one building. That building was placed on the corner of Pepke Road and Harmony Road. The entry would be before the building along Harmony Road, and the parking was a partial surface parking and then a subgrade parking structure. Street side allows for more affordable housing units, 7 compared to 4 of Hillside. Both designs allow for the full child care program that was determined to be the ideal program. So I had, I put a little bit more of information in this since we went a week, we pushed this back a week, this work session. So we had some early cost estimates. The cost estimates are designing to net zero. It includes the housing, the parking, the site improvements, the child care center. The calculation seems pretty thorough. It accounts for cost escalation, so they did the pricing today, but they're assuming if we started construction next year, the increase in costs over time to that start date. They've included that. There's contingencies included in the numbers. However, it hasn't been value engineered at this point. And the numbers are more than we anticipated, but things are pretty expensive right now. Hillside came in at $20 million, and the street side came in at 27. One of the big drivers in the difference in the price would be the structured parking. That just is more expensive.
Yeah, let me ask one other detail question on these. Are either of these numbers including the housing units?
Yes. they
Okay,
both.
and so Hillside is 4. How many is street side?
Street side is 7.
7, okay. Thank you.
Okay. So before we had these numbers, the design advisory group had looked over both these concepts, and they supported the advancement to schematic design of Hillside. The reasons being that they felt that a standalone ECE center would create a better sense of place and arrival for future students. They liked the separation between housing and work with 2 structures. And on the staff side, the benefit we thought was that this design would allow for the ECE center and the housing to be bifurcated if necessary, allowing for separate entitlement tracks. So the first question that we have today is, do you support the confirmation, or do you confirm that Hillside is the preferred design concept? Generally speaking.
Is that everything?
No, I think, well, I was going to say, if you do think initially that Hillside is the one to go with, we have subsequent questions to talk about on that specific design.
Okay. All right, then we have a couple questions at this point. I'll start with Skippy, and then Ward and Rachel.
Yeah, a few questions. first thing is on the housing in general, are we thinking that these are? Into my mouth.
That's pretty,
It's delicious. On the housing in general, are we thinking that these are going to be tied to the child care center? Are they just free agent units? What's the thought process there?
The design direction given by City Council was that these were for early childhood education teachers.
So not necessarily this facility?
No, the intention, well, no, I believe that would be an inaccurate assumption. The intentions are, and this is paid with the Kids First Fund, which would restrict it only to teachers within the early childhood education field.
Okay, but they may be at this building, they may be at a different building, or both?
That is undetermined at this time. It depends on the leasing structure decided for the classroom space.
Okay, but at this point, we're thinking of at least tied to that. We talked about number of housing units, but what about like bedroom size and makeup between the two different designs?
I don't have the details on that. We were looking at the APCHA requirements for minimum sizing.
I mean, are we getting more units because they're smaller units, or are we getting more of the same size units?
I think I'm sorry, you're going to say.
So because we're at conceptual design, the number of bedrooms is not figured out. It is a box of square footage that is for housing that we estimate 4 units approximately in. Most likely there are ones and maybe a 2-bedroom in there.
Twos and ones are kind of what we were emphasizing.
Yeah, I don't believe we put any 3 bedrooms in this particular work, knowing that we were trying to maximize the volume of units available.
Okay, so I should understand that they're relatively apples to apples. So we're getting 4 ones or twos in one and 7 ones or twos in the other.
You will probably get, well, you're getting more units in street side.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that we're not getting, 4 3-bedrooms over here and 7 1-bedrooms over here.
No, we said to focus on 2 bedrooms and
Okay.
ones. But I think what they're looking at is what can on the 2 designs, what mass can be handled, essentially.
Yeah, okay. And then, so looking at I guess it's the street side where the buildings are bifurcated, and, sort of wanting to have our cake and eat it too, did we look at an option where additional like the buildings could stay bifurcated, but the additional units could come back further and be podiumed over that parking so that they would be on that second level?
Well, no, because I think part of what we were looking at, and what we're talking about is, you're talking about Hillside, the 2 separate buildings.
Yeah, sorry, Hillside.
No, we did not look at putting housing over the parking. I mean, it's a fair amount of square footage on that site so far.
Right, but the other one has more square footage, but it's
a
just
bit more.
concentrated. Yeah. Okay. And then, the last question is just sort of the programming at this point. It kind of talks about the different age cohorts to be served. And I know that there's different requirements for facilities between those things. So is this designed, or is the intention to design it in a way that over time we could trade out those ages in all facilities or some? What's the thought there?
Yeah, so I am not a child care specialist, but the conversations have been, how do you create flexibility in the room so that they could flex if needed, depending on age categories. Is there anything else you'd want me to add, Megan?
Okay.
Okay.
And that would be the same regardless of design. Okay. Those are my questions. Oh, I'm sorry, I have one more question. I lied.
The architect would like to add a comment
Yes.
on
and
that.
I do have one more question, sorry.
Andrea? You're muted.
My lip reading's not good.
Maybe Skippy, ask your question.
Sure. So just on this survey, I'm curious about how many total responses, who were they, and when we're looking at those numbers, I'm curious about the cross tabulation about things like, do you have children, and how you're answering those. Do you plan to have children?
So I included the summary in the packet, and what I recall is, let's see, over 70 responses in the Aspen Community Voice Survey, and 84% identified as Burlingame residents.
Do we know if, like, the breakdown of children, non-children?
There was some in the summary about if you would use the services or not. I can't recall the
But we don't know
results
which
off the
one
top
goes
of
in
my
what
head.
bucket right now. Okay.
I have them in front of me if you have any questions that you need.
Well, I'm just curious, looking at the numbers, like on the surveys we used to do around next gen, childcare was either the most important thing that you ranked or the last thing, and it was based on children. So I'm wondering if the 60% are all people with children and the 15% are people who don't have children, and it would help me interpret better.
It doesn't break that out like that.
Yeah.
It just gives the raw numbers about
Yeah.
age ranges and then those that are interested in using it and those that are not.
Okay. Okay. TBD. Got it. Okay. That was my last question.
Okay.
Ward and then Rachel.
Yeah, I have a couple of really foundational questions, one of which is, we've just defined this as a tier 1 goal, one of our top 3 goals. And I've seen so many varying numbers of need that I don't want to put $20 million plus into a facility and find that there isn't a need for it. So we've all seen the ACRA studies that say that a very small percentage of people moved away because of a lack of childcare, but that could be formed in that how you form that question can dictate what the answer is. You know, did you leave because of housing? Did you leave because of pay? Did you leave because of childcare? And childcare was really low on that. But over the last year or so, we've seen a lot of different takes on what the demand for childcare is, and it changes every year with the new crop of kids coming up. But I need a high level of comfort. Number one, before we go any further, is that there is a need that we will, if we put 20+ million into a facility with housing, that we're going to have 7 classrooms that are going to be utilized, and then an extraction of that we're going to be able to find childcare providers, and further down the line, are we going to be able to pay them enough so that they can work there? And I know that's coming forward on another work session, but.
Right, and to clarify, right now, just to try to somewhat follow the council's rules of debates, we're really looking for clarifying questions right now, and if we could jump into the merits of moving forward, and if so, how, it would be just helpful for us to make sure we've got clarity, if we've not represented anything to any of you well enough to be able to feel like you can participate in that. Thank you.
Well, I can participate in it, but I need to know that there's a need for it. And that really is the foundational thing. I don't want to put a bunch of
So
money.
we'll put that on the list as missing information for you.
I'm sorry?
We will put it on the list as missing information for you to be able to choose a concept tonight.
Okay. Another foundational question is the number of units that can be built. I don't anticipate that the HOA is going to be 100% in agreement that we can increase the number of units. When BG3 is completed, that's going to be 256 units?
It's approved for 258 units. Right now, there's 177 units built, and when Burlingame 3 with the multifamily, and then these two single-family residential lots, that would bring it up to 258.
58.
Well, 256 is including, it's approved for 258, 256, and Burlingame 3 is completed, which leaves only 2 units.
Right, and those two single-family home lots that we are looking at as part of this entire.
Yeah, so if we're looking at doing a street side that allows 7 units, that's 5 more units than are available. If we're looking at Hillside with 4 units, that's 2 more units that are available.
Correct, and this was another area that we did more research on. In 2009, a resolution was passed that caps the units in the subdivision, and it subsequently says that, and I believe changes the declarations that says that any increase in the unit cap in the future has to be approved by 100% of the unit owners.
And that's exactly why I'm asking this
So
question.
currently, it would be 177 people who would have to agree to that.
That all the members of and that's the master HOA, that's BG 1 and 2.
That, the attorney can clarify that, but it's clearly the existing unit owners, which is 177
Okay.
today.
That has a lot of effect on how I go with this. I have questions. Would the housing aspect of this be, could we fund that with 150 fund for the housing units, or 505, 150, I would think?
Our understanding was if this was a effort in order to support early childhood education, that it needed to come from the Kids First Fund, and that these housing units, and quite frankly, it affects some of the design, is only intended for those who would meet the requirements to be able to be working with young children, because we have different needs and security issues associated with individuals working with early childhood education programs. So our intentions all along have been is that this is a responsibility of the 150 Fund. It's certainly council's purview to open up a responsibility of the Kids First Fund. It is certainly council's purview to open up your 150 Fund policy, which has been for decades to be for general community housing, then if you so chose to do that. But at this point, this council has not directed me to look at using the 150 Fund in this project.
And that opens up this slippery slope that we've talked about for years about who you do prioritize. If we put it as if we fund it with the 150 and say only child care providers can live in it, then we've opened this whole process of who qualifies, who are essential workers. And that's a slippery, I don't want to prioritize a dishwasher, a line cook, and any other number of workers. I don't want to get involved in that. So this, to me, looks like it's going to be a Kids First Fund. The whole thing is going to be Kids First, which means that we're going to have to find another source of funding because we're well below 20 million in the Kids First Fund.
Yeah.
Just clarification, the Hillside is 20 million with 4 workforce housing. Street side is 7 with 27 million.
Yes.
Okay. Because this is, I mean, this hits on 2 of our priorities, and we've been working with the lumberyard for a long time and working to try to get to be net zero. But I don't think the lumberyard is net zero. We're trying to get as close as we can. My direct question is, what is the cost of making this net zero? And I don't expect you to have, Jim, that on the top of your head, but that's a clarifying question that I need to balance. How much money we're going to have to spend for this, and what the environmental impact of it's going to be, and how much it's going to cost. If we're going to put solar, I see the projections are we put a bunch of solar panels there, but I'd be curious. I can't remember exactly how close we are to net zero on lumberyard and schematic at this point, but I don't think we're anywhere near 100%. So what is the cost of making this a 100% net zero?
And when you ask that, what are you asking? Is it something that would be taken out of the budget, or are you looking for a comparison between Hillside and Street Side to know what the cost implications are in the 2 different designs?
I think that net zero for either of those, the Hillside is what appeals to me because it's a lower cost. I don't have any confidence that we're going to get 100% of BG owners to agree to increasing 2 more units. I could be wrong. I hope I am wrong. And to be clear, I support the goals, the 2 goals. The one goal of increased capacity and availability, so we've got to make it so it's affordable. I do support that, and I do support housing for the childcare providers. I need to balance those needs and those goals and those values with the amount of money it's going to cost to do this, and weigh that $20 or $27 million against how that could be used at the lumberyard or in other places. So I'm just trying to get a full understanding of the holistic outlook of this. And I don't want to leave any impression that I'm against childcare, because I'm not, but I want to make sure that the need is there, that when we build 7 classrooms, that we're going to have people that can house that, run it, people to work there. All of those aspects that we need to have a successful childcare delivery to our community. One of the questions in here was, should Burlingame get higher priority for childcare there? And I'm definitely against that. It should be for everybody. Those were, I think, my basic fundamental questions. And as we go to, and I also want to know, what is the cost of going from, we're at conceptual to 100% schematic? And what do we gain? What do we gain by being at 100% schematic?
Well, you'll have a more developed single design. We'll be able to get better cost estimating. That's why right now we're doing the check-in to see what concerns you have, if we need to modify program at all. Like you just said about net zero versus highly energy efficient. There might be some cost savings. I don't know if that's going to be a lot. But, I think we need to be able to give you some answers on where can we get, and you make the decision on where you want to go. Off the top of my head, conceptual was, I think total was 250. We're at beyond, just a bit beyond 50%, I believe, so far is what I recall.
So it's only going to cost another $150,000, $125,000 to go to 100% schematic?
Yeah, for the
Okay.
design, yeah.
Yeah, well, that seems to be a no-brainer for me, that we should continue to 100% schematic. But skip you some of those questions that you're answering, I think, come in on conceptual. How many, what's the bedroom mix, who gets it, and all of that is a little bit further down the line. But those are what my concerns are, and make it clear what my desire is, that we have affordable, attainable, and capacity for childcare, quality childcare for our community, for the whole community.
And just to be clear, where we are moving forward, if the decision can be made at the table tonight, which concept to go forward with, we are looking at an addition. The next phase of this to get to 100% schematic is approximately 150, 200,000, whatever.
The total to schematic was, I'm recalling, don't hold me to this, but I want to say it was about $250,000.
Right, these are funds council's already appropriated and that we have under contract with our design team. I think that's where we see it as a natural check-in of going from schematic, that we would want to come back with you and say, do you want us to pursue entitlements now? Or is that something you want to wait till later? And before presenting that question to the council, I think it's important you hear these other proposals and some of the challenges within this particular fund, so you can tell us which one you think is the highest priority right now for the dollars.
Okay.
And my answer to the direct question is Hillside would be the one that I would pursue.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the well-prepared memo. I really appreciate, and all the work that the child care providers have put into this. The things that struck me are, while on another project, I might say, oh, can we phase it? Can we start with 60 classroom bed, spots and move forward, as need proves itself or shows up? But I don't think you want the disruption around a childcare facility if you had to go back in and start adding an addition or doing the second phase after people are already using it. So I don't really see any sort of real opportunities for phasing on this. And I think that when we were looking at the larger childcare issues, I believe you may have been in Chamonix at that time, and we talked about the 0.45-cent sales tax being approved for housing and childcare, and that using it for housing childcare workers would be appropriate, and that we looked at the cost of a unit to subsidize now and kind of how little difference it makes to change the ratios within this one fund, because our primary fund is the real estate transfer tax. The ratio was originally 50-50 to both sides. I think the prior council, or one prior council, changed it to 45-55, and we're talking about, we asked staff to come back with what would be a ratio change that would allow us to accomplish our childcare and childcare housing goals. So that's where we're looking at it. I still don't think we can afford $20 million with it. We're going to be depending on state and federal grants to really move this forward, and who knows, maybe a little private philanthropic efforts. I wanted to kind of get a clarifying question to you, Jen. Do we have to go to a HOA vote on Hillside to go from 2 units to 4? Yes.
So the benefit I mentioned is that the Hillside designs the child care center as a standalone
Right.
center. So that can move forward through the entitlement process. The adding of anything but 2
Okay, I got you.
units.
I just wasn't sure from the memo. I kind of
Yes.
thought that the 7 required the vote, but that the Hillside 4 didn't, but they both would require a vote.
Right, anything
Yes.
above 2 would require
Okay.
approval.
Well, I do think you're going to have a little more success with just 4 units than 7. But the bigger thing I was looking at is the difference for 3 units is $7 million more. That doesn't make sense to me on the street side. That's literally $2 million a unit, and we do a little better than that. So I wouldn't want to try to maximize that out. But I guess the question would be how long, or what is the process to be able to present this to the residents to vote and find out if they will support 4 units there, or will they only do 2?
I think what we'd need to do is talk with both management and city attorneys and come up with a plan on how to crack this nut.
Okay, yeah, that's all I was thinking, is that, it's important to find out, get the vote, and then proceed with what we can do, whether it's 4 or 2, to my mind. The other thing I think that we'll let management consider is, should there be an offer of some sort of sweetener to the voters of the HOA? A contribution to the capital reserves, or is it anything else? I mean, when you're talking 177 voters and you only need 1 no vote, I think it'd be better to offer some sweeteners to begin with and see if anything would happen. But otherwise, yeah, I'd like to proceed with Hillside. I think it looked a lot better. I somehow, even just the idea of a child care center near street side doesn't appeal to me. I think, it's a later design detail about how we screen the cars from the road and things like that. I think that would be very important, parking right next to the road there. And, a little sound attenuation is probably going to be important for the child care center as well. But I think it's good work. I think we need to move forward. The thing I can think about is I just think we need to focus on what are the needs today as much as what will the needs be in 20 years. Because, whether it's the jail that was built, 40 years ago that they're now saying is inadequate, or other facilities that we have are inadequate. We've watched our library expand. We've watched the schools expand. I don't want to build something that is inadequate for the future once it's opened. And, projects like this take time to plan, take time to come to fruition. But, and it's very hard for any of us to try to guess what need would be in 20 years. But I think you need to build for the future and not just, today's situation. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
John?
Yeah, just really quick. At first blush, I kind of like the street side issue, just the street side version, just because it was one building, and as we all know, they use less energy, but I think staff has given us a memo that shows many reasons why Hillside would be a better option, including that the design will allow the center and the housing to be bifurcated, allowing for separate entitlement tracks. I think this should go forward. I vote for Hillside.
All right. Do you have any further comments right now? Or,
I
got
have
a couple
comments, but I'm
things.
happy to listen to your thoughts
All right,
first.
let me go then, so
Yeah.
maybe you
Yeah, incorporate.
glean something from it. I don't know. I doubt it. Okay, it is not just the approval of the additional units or density, but it's also the vote of approval by residents to change from single-family lot allocation to multifamily. So, and I'm sorry I haven't resolved this already under myself, but so with the Hillside, the opportunity is only four units.
So in the design, they thought that was an appropriate massing for those two lots.
Okay, so with different massing, but, okay, I understand.
And you are correct. I guess I didn't state that as clearly. The two lots are approved for single-family residential, so it would need to be approved for multifamily, and then anything above 2 units needs that additional density approval.
If we were to build, could you build the Hillside concept and do 2 single-family units? I guess what I'm saying is if we're all looking at this as a package, but if this comes back where a unanimous vote of Burlingame looks unlikely, would we have the ability to move forward with the Hillside design concept and build 2 units of housing?
In Hillside on parcel C? Or,
No, so the council can choose to change its direction that you gave us in June to say, don't put housing in it and go with the traditional 2 single-family lots and confine the conceptual and schematic design of the childcare facility to Lot C. That is absolutely an option for the council if you wish to remove the housing from the project. The question is, when do you want us to tell us that, and are you willing to go backwards a little bit to go forwards that might require if you want us to remove the housing?
And so my question is, if we hit a wall with the housing, with the increase of 2 units, if we hit a wall with changing the single, can the design of the Hillside, because they are bifurcated, could the Hillside design for the educational portion continue forward, and then 2 single, I can't, from the maps I have here, I can't see the lot breakdown, so my question is.
So the question is, and I'm going to ask maybe Andrea to answer this. Andrea, my understanding is from the Hillside option that it is possible to construct the childcare facility without the housing component in the Hillside option. And you are still
we
muted.
still can't hear you.
Maybe off and back on.
The site plan, one thing we needed to look at is, does childcare need a little bit for the parking of Lot 4 and 3? But that would be a boundary line adjustment, and you could still build the single-family homes is something we'd look at. Is that what you're asking?
Yes,
There you go.
Good,
thank you,
Sorry.
lot line.
thank you. Then again, my other question has been answered about costs moving forward to get this to the next phase is 100,000, 200,000, somewhere in there for finishing this next phase. Okay. I'll stall for a second, but I mean, I appreciate the work that's gone into this. I respect the approach that the Hillside concept brings to this. So I think that's probably our smartest track, not just because of the benefits that are enumerated here. I will say again, as I've said throughout this conversation, my questions come in along the greater concerns about staffing it, about the housing to staff it, and our future plans for some sort of facility at the lumberyard. Not necessarily knowing whether those both as facilities are necessary, warranted moving forward. So I still have my concerns about this being the location for this facility, but for our next step in moving this forward, because it may be the right decision, I'm supportive of the Hillside recommendation. Skippy, I'm going to come back to you. Basically, I was just asking about whether or not the housing of two single-family could move forward, would move forward, as well as the Hillside. So they are not tied together. They can move forward separate tracks, but
they could both happen.
they both could happen. So, so that could be an end. We might run into that as a stumbling block. Burlingame might not be able to deliver unanimous votes on this. But if we have a fallback position where we can still achieve the single-family lots as well as this, then I have greater comfort with it. I also, as you walked back in, was explaining, the reservations that I've had for a long time about this facility as well as the lumberyard.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, okay. No, I appreciate you asking. I was going to ask the same question about the houses. So I guess my thoughts are really more requests for info more than anything as we move forward. I'm glad that we're moving forward on additional childcare capacity and the rest, but I still have some threshold questions that I will need before moving it forward. Rachel, I really appreciate you sharing the funding mechanism. That's super helpful, and I totally agree with that approach to this, so I think that's good. Like Ward was saying, I want to feel more buttoned up on the needs assessment. I think we're now kind of building this consolidated waiting list. I think that's going to be really good to see. I'd like to understand sort of childcare needs and trends over time, like Rachel said. I do want to make sure we're not building something that's out of date. And on the flip side of that same equation, I don't want to build the empty cities in China, right? Sure. So I want to kind of understand how have our needs and trends of childcare moved with increases in population. We're seeing that slow to a near zero, but we have some new affordable housing coming on. So I really want to be able to look out and make our best faith projection and use that. I know it's forthcoming, but the teacher availability obviously is the second part of that. It's also very clearly tied to the housing, but I'll want more information there. I'd like to have some understanding of how many teachers do we think it will take to staff this facility initially and at full go, and how does that relate to those needs? My initial reaction was just sort of programmatically. I agree that the hillside with distinct buildings is advantageous, if for no other reason than we're separating uses. That seems healthy for the teachers and for the people at work and all of that. The one very obvious drawback is less housing units. And I looked at the same numbers and thought, that's a really expensive price tag for extra units in a less functional environment. But I would like to look at keeping them separate. Can we add a few more units onto that front building? And I thought, podiuming them off the back over the parking may be a way to do it without what is the largest extra cost, which is digging out from underneath it. So I would want to know if that's possible. I recognize that all of that comes in the face of vote of the community. I don't know if one is too many. I don't know if 4 or 7 are a threshold. I don't know. I'd rather ask and find out. You know, I think of all the housing that could go there, childcare would be something that would be more amenable, but I just don't know. And so just planning for that response, I would love to know if we move forward with, you know, currently allotted housing, 2 single-family homes, what's the max square footage that could be built in that environment under current allotments? How does that relate to the total square footage of 4 or 7 units? It may be similar, right, because houses are big. Does that have any sway with the community? We're not adding square footage, we're just adding front doors. I don't know, but I'd love to check in on that. And if we still get a shut door on both of those, you know, I wonder, not so much what Tori said about should the child care be at the lumberyard, but should the housing for the child care be at the lumberyard? Should we just move that development of the housing over to that parcel and
Might
do
be.
it there? Maybe do we build the 2 houses to full spec and sell them as RO and use that to help fund the housing on the lumberyard parcel? So I'd want to kind of think through the waterfall of choices there. So I like where we're heading, but I want to figure out how we can maximize the housing piece to the benefit of all of it and think about how we can be flexible of locations to do it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So the architect was
Yep.
hoping to try one last
We're going
time
to
to say something.
try one more time. Andrea?
We'll have her call in if this doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's not working.
Colin?
She can call my phone.
Dial into the Zoom number.
Oh, can you
We could have her, could somebody tell?
Can you dial into Zoom? Thumbs up. Okay.
Something on her end.
Okay. So what I did here is everyone's okay with Hillside. Moving forward schematically with multifamily at this point for the design. Heard Skippy saying, is that enough? What else can we do? I don't want to belabor this. I did have some other slides, but I've heard a fair amount. I'm just curious, are there any big concerns at this point? Just trying to call.
I think we have good direction
Okay.
to go from here for the next phase. What I did hear from 2 of you, and that I just want to be clear, is do you want us to go forward still with any more work right now? Because 2 of you have expressed concerns about not understanding demand for this amenity in the community, and this service in the community. And I need clarity on whether that issue needs to be resolved further in order to have a majority of council's support for the project going to 100% schematic. Thank you.
So would you guys entertain additional information around buttoning up demand, teacher availability? I
So
think
in
are the
essence,
main-
do you want us to pause this in order to do that work before we proceed and expend any more money on schematic design? Because I now have 2 of you who've expressed that concern. And I need clarity of whether there's a third.
I think there's 3 of us that have concern, but again, I'm not asking for that prior to this decision. What I'm understanding right now is that currently budgeted is the funding to move this to 100% schematic. And that those expenditures are somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 to $200,000 to finish this phase.
The total to get to schematic was, I want to say, about $240,000, and we're at around 55% is the last invoice, I believe.
Okay, so then I look at the other 2 that had the same need and other concerns and say, do you want to hold this up, this piece of going towards Hillside? So today, very specifically, what we are deciding is between street side and Hillside, and finishing that to schematic, at which point it does not mean it moves forward yet. Are you comfortable endorsing the Hillside schematic to move forward at this time?
Look, my intuition, which has met, you know, a lot of conversations over years, suggests that this will move forward in some way. And so moving forward is great. I just want to be clear with everyone else that until I take that next step of greenlighting a project, I'll need some of those things answered. And if they're not answered in the way I think they will be, you know, we'll have burned, at least from my vote, you know, some money. So do we want to do that or not is the question.
That's the question to you. you're okay here, but not further. I think Sarah understands that.
Yeah, if you guys feel super confident that this will move forward and you guys don't feel that, if you guys don't share the kind of latent concern that I do, that gives me confidence to move forward, knowing that, that information may come back as unexpected. If I was a single person, I'd want to know that more, but I don't have huge heartburn about moving it forward.
Okay. Do you have a comment?
You know,
here?
I think we should move it forward. There's going to be any number of questions that we can't answer. Particularly finding employees. I think there's not a business in this community that's not finding employees, but they're not all shutting down. And I don't think we just stop doing childcare or preparing for new spots because we don't know how we're going to get the teachers. I mean, that's just backwards to me. It's kind of like the ski company would announce, hey, we're just not going to open Buttermilk this year, and they're going to close it for good because we really don't have enough patrollers. That doesn't happen. You keep struggling till you can find a way to get the people you need or to prioritize that sort of thing. So I just don't know that answer's out there right now. Or if so, it would be something that's similar to every other business in this town of saying, well, you could shut down half the hotel rooms, shut down the restaurants a little earlier because we don't have employees. And so I don't know about that. I think families will continue to have babies, and I think that that's a goal of our community plan, is that we have a sustainable community. That's why we build 3 bedrooms, so that people can potentially have a family, and, a lot of them are stuck in 2 bedrooms or 1 bedrooms. Our workforce comes down from Down Valley. They need childcare as well. These things are cyclic. There's times when, you might say, wow, we have extra spaces. And then just 2 weeks ago, we didn't have any extra space at all. And so I'm okay moving this forward. And I think firming up that information might add more comfort for people about wait lists where we are now. But it's as important to look at what is the birth rate at all the hospitals in the valley as it is to say what's the wait list for childcare now.
Yeah, 100%.
That's kind of where I think you get more of your demographic. It's true, we're an aging community, but do we want to be an aging community, or do we want new families to feel that they can settle somewhere in the valley and they can work here? So I'm happy to move this forward and just hope we can find the grants.
Yeah, I visualize the whole process. It's going to be a couple of years. I visualize it as we're closing a door in the hall and we're progressing. So as we progress to 100% schematic, I don't want to go back and look at street side because we've made this decision, we've closed the door to go forward with Hillside. But those questions remain before additional doors are closed on that hallway and we hear that slamming of the door echo that we're getting closer, that, early on in the process, I want to approach Burlingame and see if we can get the community spirit from them to allow 2 to 5 more units. But Hillside is for 4 units, so at least 2 more units. Those other questions of slamming the doors, are we going to get people to run somebody to run those are doors to be closed further down the line.
Okay.
But yes, I want to go forward to 100% schematic on Hillside with a realization that there are additional doors that I need to slam and know what the answers are.
John?
Yeah, I just want to point out, with what happened at the Red Brick and all the comments we've heard from parents saying, what are we going to do now? This is a step in the right direction that says we're listening to our constituents and trying to provide more childcare.
Yellow brick, right?
Yellow Brick, I'm sorry.
So we will move forward, taking this towards 100% schematic. We will engage with the Burlingame neighborhood. We need to get further along on this design before I think we're ready to talk with the neighborhood. Because they're going to just have some operational questions that we don't have fully sorted out at this level of design detail. In terms of timeline for that work, this is several months worth of work, just to be clear. So I don't foresee this specific project coming back to council for another engagement conversation for quite a while because of that workload that needs to be done before we're at decision points again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
I see Andrea's called in. Andrea, did you want to add anything? We kind of finalized the conversation, but was there something that you wanted to add?
We still can't hear her.
Oh, no, come on.
I think a couple of things just to point out. We didn't really get into the details, but I did hear Rachel say screening and sound attenuation. Hillside is pretty close to property lines, so we might have some, it might be a little bit tough on some
Well, it might not be
aspects.
vegetative, but
Yeah.
you work with the designers.
And the the hillside parking, we've been talking about how we need to be creative with it. It's a fair amount of parking. We still need to get to what the number is. So we're still working on some of those items.
I have one other question. Is there any reason, again, Skippy has alluded to the lumberyard lots at potential for childcare as well. And, I kind of look at it and thinking, well, if this facility ends up satisfying all the need, then that Burlingame lot could be available for more housing. On the other hand, is there a question that says, well, this facility designed for 100 people or 100 students is so expensive, it might take us a very long time to gather the money. Should this be only for 60 students and then another somewhere else? I mean, is there a way, has that been thought about in the
Yes.
group and other discussions?
We've had a little bit of discussion about programming, and if we reduced it, I think there's going to be some weighing of cost savings versus how many children you can.
Cheaper by the dozen?
So we have looked at that. I think we just need to know exactly what is the program, what is the ideal programming? If we cut some of it, how much does it really cut from construction? And are you
Right,
really
right.
saving?
I can see that. I just had wanted to make sure you'd looked at it from those perspectives too.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I would encourage the council, this isn't an either or. This community is going to need both of these sites. It's
Over
just a
time.
matter of when they develop,
Yeah.
both the lumberyard site and this site. I think it was very fortuitous back in 1996, we were talking about this need likely needing to happen here, and the entitlements back when Burlingame was initially done, that this site was set aside with intentions for this use.
Very good.
Sarah, so are you saying that in your mind, like 100%, at some point in the future, both of these sites will need to have childcare facilities at them to meet the need? Is that what you're saying?
I don't foresee our workforce need for childcare going down. And what we hear from our constituents is they prefer at these younger ages for their children to be where they work more than where they live. So even as there's more childcare being developed throughout the valley, I'm convinced that here we are, 96 to now, what is that? I hate to do the math in my head. We're at 26, I was like, it's more than 25, 26 years, and we still haven't built it. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be a demand for this. I also think the other piece is that we could benefit perhaps from a little bit of diversity in the type of programs provided in our community, because different families have different desires and needs of what early childhood education looks like. And this is an opportunity for us to allow that self-directed choice for families as well.
Okay. So I would love, I would personally love to sort of download that thought process from your brain, whether that's in a next packet or just a one-to-one meeting, to like really understand the thought process and waterfalls out of all of that, because I would like to have the same degree of confidence that you have.
Any other questions that you needed answered this evening, or that was the one?
No, and if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out.
Thanks so much, Jen.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry we missed you.
Coming.
Architect whose name I can no longer read. Apologies for that. Andrea, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen.
Welcome.
Good to see you on the hike the other day. I was like, head down, I was like, oh, wait, Chad. Sometimes I can't tell. I'm just like in my mode. And then I'm like, oh, wait, I know that person. Now
Hey
for the
Denise,
easy
while
stuff.
while we're on transition, or Scott, will you hop on and do an audio check for us? I want to see if we can hear you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, could you turn the heat up on your way out?
It's going to keep getting colder.
You feeling it?
Oh, yeah, baby.
I keep seeing Sarah's like,
Why is it always so cold in here?
it's not always.
It starts out warm and then it gets cold. It's got cold creep is what it is.
Well, look outside, you know, it's,
Okay, check this out.
Well, that suggests we have a very leaky building, which is not what we greenlit.
just
I
changed
showed this
10
to,
10 degrees in the last.
this is the National Building Museum in Washington DC, designed by the Civil War general. The offices are around the perimeter are just offices. This was built to distribute pensions after the Civil War.
I think the issue is on our end, guys.
Here's the interior, right?
Palatial.
Okay, now, it was also designed, the way it was designed, it didn't need air conditioning. It had these air vents built into it on the sides, and they funneled it
go
into that
underneath.
giant space in the middle, and it cooled the
I
building.
remember touring Eden's facility.
So I asked the tour guide, I was like, I heard this building was built and it didn't need air conditioning, and he said, yeah, and it worked really well. The problem was, in the wintertime, it was cold. So they put a traditional HVAC system in this building that was designed.
Yeah, the problem is, we also didn't put in heat.
But we did put in people who can do this.
Little bodies.
You sent me there. I've gone there so many times. It's one of my favorite places to hang out, actually, inside.
It's crazy.
When you get into all the exhibits that are inside those.
They had one on the Notre Dame being rebuilt.
Oh, is that the Smithsonian's?
It wasn't the Smithsonian, but they might have done some of the exhibits. We actually, we went to Memphis and toured the Civil Rights Museum too.
All right.
And that was done by the Smithsonian.
We're on to our next item on our work session agenda this evening, which is West End traffic.
Exactly.
And then in the winter, they reverse it, so they pull like the hot air, because it's a greenhouse.
Right.
Back down and under, but that's not a greenhouse, so that wouldn't work.
This wasn't from the ground, though. This was through the walls.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Place called Solder City, that, you should look up, they do some really.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Today, we'll be talking about the West End Traffic Calming and Traffic Study. We have here Scott Wenning, who is the project manager of the traffic study for this project. We also have Pete Rice, the deputy city engineer, and and then we have Mike Horvath, senior project manager of transportation projects. Darn it. Okay. Here's the organization of the presentation tonight. We're going to start with a background and history of the project and what has been done in the West End in recent history. Recent history meaning, 15 years or so. Then we're going to look at the operation of traffic in the West End. How does it operate? What does it look like? And then we're going to go through the traffic calming policy as it relates to the West End. And we'll review the traffic study that was performed by a third-party engineer. And then we'll go through the potential next steps in council direction. This is what we'll be asking council or going through with council at the end of the presentation. Whoa, I think I did it on this, sorry. Which includes, does council want
us to develop measures for the West End that would increase traffic congestion on Main Street? Or should we limit interim actions until the entrance to Aspen can be implemented? Another option is to develop Main Street capacity conceptual projects. So essentially increasing the capacity outbound on Main Street. And we'll get more into that as we do the presentation. So as some history, recent history, I guess, I don't know, 15 years, I don't know if you consider that recent or not. When we looked at what's been done in the West End, we were able to find 19 measures that have been implemented over the years. Now, these measures range from physical modifications to the roadways, like the bollards that you find at the end of Bleecker Street, at Main Street, to TDM measures, that's traffic demand management measures, such as the crosstown shuttle. And there's a whole gamut of in-between of things that the city has done in the West End. Now, during 2021, the West End contacted the city regarding traffic concerns and safety concerns in the West End. And so, as a result, the city followed our process as outlined in the city's neighborhood traffic calming policy. Additionally, council did set aside funding for a traffic study. That study was completed this year, and as I mentioned earlier, that was done by a third-party traffic engineer. Next. So this is where I need I'm going to talk about the existing traffic operation. To do that, I need this annotation to work. Otherwise, yes. Okay. Do you see this red dot here? Okay. All right. Before I start into the traffic operation, I need to go over some definitions, some terminology, so that we're all on the same page. Streets in general are classified into general categories. Now, these categories are industry standards. In particular, when I say industry standards, this is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, so AASHTO, will classify streets based on their geometry and their usage. So we'll start out with residential streets. So residential streets feed into what's called collector streets. And then collectors feed into arterials. In this case, we have residential streets feeding into smuggler, which acts as a collector merely by geometry because it's connected into an arterial, which is Cemetery Lane. Main Street is also an arterial roadway through our city. So now we got that terminology done. The study that was done looked at peak traffic in the West End. So when I say peak traffic, specifically I'm talking about the afternoon or PM peak is how we call it. And when I say the PM peak, in particular, we're going to be looking at that hour in which the highest amount of traffic goes through. So that's the peak hour of traffic. So these numbers that I'm going through is going to be that peak hour. And we can talk about peak, daily traffic, peak afternoon traffic. But for this presentation, we're going to talk about that PM peak so that we can understand how traffic is flowing through the West End. All right. With that said, let's get this dot up here. So our PM peak in Aspen is about 1,800 vehicles. Also, these numbers have ranges. So I'm not going to talk about those ranges. I'm going to give you a number that's representative of what's happening. And with that said, so 1,800 vehicles, PM peak, afternoon, which you might think, okay, what time in the afternoon is that? So we're talking about between 4 and 5 o'clock in the evening. That's our PM peak. So between 4 and 5, we have 1,800 vehicles leaving Aspen. Out of those 1,800 vehicles, we have 1,200, around 1,200, going through the S-curves. So the S-curves, that's the max that we can get through the S-curves. Maybe, this is showing 1,250, but around 1,200. That's the max we can push through in its current configuration. Anyhow, the remaining 600 are making its way through the west end. So out of those 600 vehicles, that's going to be distributed across 4 main streets. We're talking about Smuggler, Francis, Hallam, and Bleecker, with Smuggler getting the majority of that traffic during the peak, around 240 vehicles. We also have Bleecker around 200, but all of these vehicles that are making their way through the west end, ultimately they're going to funnel through at 8th and Power Plant / Smuggler Street. Here's where we have that 650 vehicles. From here, some vehicles are going to be exiting A Street, but the majority of them are continuing on Power Plant Road and connecting on to Cemetery Lane. From there, it's about a 50-50% split. 50% go to McLean Flats, 50% go back to Main Street.
To 82.
Yes, I'm sorry, you're right, 82. That's how traffic operates currently. Next slide, Scott will be talking about, we need to change off the annotation for this to work. Talking about, what's your next slide?
Next one is volume.
Volume.
Before we move, are there any questions about this data? Because typically we have not presented this level of data on flows to the council, but we think it's really critical in understanding the trade-offs. And this is what the behavior is today from drivers.
So the black bars that are on this map represent traffic counters?
Correct.
And at no time did we ever try to prohibit a left turn off of Power Plant onto Cemetery Lane?
Correct. We did not prohibit.
We haven't done
This is
that.
existing conditions.
I understand.
We're only capturing existing conditions shown on this slide.
Okay.
I might answer that briefly with that it was tried in, I believe, 2010, but that is not reflected in that in this data.
I recall that being tried.
And trying to think if there was also maybe in the recent years during COVID, was there some, what am I thinking of? I thought we prohibited it just briefly for some other reason. Anyway, never mind. I'm just wondering, but we haven't done it in this scenario. And obviously my question leads to like, oh, well, if you prohibited the left turn, does that take 250 to 300 cars from doing this? We don't know. Okay.
I think what's fundamental, though, is like, this is behavior today. There are times where there are occasional closures of Power Plant Road, and there's safety closures due to snow and ice conditions in the winter. So, but during summer conditions, we generally do not close Power Plant Road unless there's some kind of safety issue that requires that closure.
One quick question. The one black bar that is a counter coming off of 8th Street, is that what we're thinking of as the Power Plant Road counter? I know we had emphasized trying to get one in so we could understand the full traffic volume, that we'd always measured how many traffic we have on Castle Creek Bridge as telling us, have we kept to our goals of, traffic in town? And not long ago, we had authorized adding a traffic counter to Power Plant Road so we could add that count to Castle Creek Bridge and have a more true count.
We're working with EOTC and in partnering with the various permanent counters that they're looking at installing on 82. As you know from EOTC, they weren't able to get any bids on that particular counter, but we are still partnering with them and planning to add a counter. As far as the location of that particular counter, I envisioned it closer to Cemetery Lane Pete, if you have any other information?
Yes, the RFP would show it closer to Cemetery Lane instead of, on this particular one, we decided to put it before 8th Street to make sure we captured everybody going.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking. Maybe I didn't do it well, but, so we're thinking the 600 to 650 at that 8th Street counter is all the other streets now funneling into one?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Scott?
Okay, Pete, you want to go to the next slide there? Thank you, Trish, for explaining how the traffic operation works. And Mr. Mayor and Council, I appreciate, this is my first time presenting to you, so thank you. So I wanted to briefly touch on the traffic volume trends. I think it's important to understand that based off of our most current data, so some of this data you've seen in the past, with one additional snapshot here would be July 2022 data is now included here. And this is both at Castle Creek Bridge and southbound on Cemetery Lane. These data indicate that there is a stable to decreasing trend on all this, on all the traffic volume, and we don't have an indication of a significant increase, with the caveat that we don't have that power plant counter yet, to answer your question, Rachel.
I just want to add, this is due when the rest of the valley is increasing in traffic. We're able, because of the TDMs that we've put in place, that throughout the years have been able to offset that to where other people have options in order for ours to decrease while everybody's is increasing.
Just a data curiosity, we've kind of have this like spike around 2015, up and down trends on both sides. It's sort of in the middle of an economic cycle. Do we have any sense of why we saw this uptrend and then downtrend between, 2011 and 2019?
I believe that's the BRT.
That's what I was thinking, BRT was implemented or enhanced and added,
Yeah.
and more transit options?
Cool.
Yeah, so the next step in our progress here was to evaluate the West End traffic according to the neighborhood traffic calming policy. Key takeaway here is the speed evaluation did not exceed our criteria for implementing physical traffic calming measures. That criteria is met at above 25 miles an hour for the 85th percentile speed, just a national way of measuring speeding concerns. And then
Let me just say, so
Sure.
when we talk about 85th percentile, it's 85% of the traffic. So most people are going less than 25 miles an hour. Actually, most, if you go on the average, is probably more like 20, less than 20. There are people, okay, that are going to speed. Like there are people that are gonna go faster than, no matter what, they're gonna go faster. So that's that 85%, that's the most people are traveling, these speeds.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but when our speed limit, other than on Main Street, is 20 miles an hour, and 85% of the people are going 25 miles per hour, doesn't that mean they're 20% over our speed limit in the West End?
So it's, to set speed limits, you want to be, people aren't going to go, you don't set a speed limit 21, you don't set a speed limit 24.
No, I know, but we have
Yeah.
set it at 20 for the whole town, other than Main Street.
25 is considered, when the 85th percentile is at 25, that is considered a posted speed limit of 20.
So
That's-
Rachel, the national model
Okay.
that's well adopted and assumes that there is a variation above the posted speed limit that is reasonable. I don't want to use the word acceptable, but that occurs. So that 85 percentile takes into account that there might be some variation above, but honestly, what we see with this data and at these low rates of speed, adding physical barriers are not going to meaningfully change the experience for the residents in the area and will likely actually trigger some more
Running of
dangerous
stop
behaviors
signs.
by drivers.
Okay, so again, are you telling me then that 15% of the people would be going 25 or above, and 85% of the people follow the 20 mile-an-hour speed limit.
Yeah, or, yes.
25 or below,
25
correct.
above. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that's the first step, is the speed evaluation criteria, or speed evaluation table. Criteria were not met for additional actions. So we also look at additional criteria for speed, speed, volume, accident, and pedestrian safety criteria. Those are evaluated in this table and are scored up to, the score here is 85 points. Above 50 points means that criteria were met. So this indicates that there's high traffic volume, right? We kind of understand that from Trish's explanation. And it suggests non-infrastructure controls. So that was enforcement, or the speed radar trailer that I believe is sometimes deployed around town. Now, those were implemented in 2021 and did not have a significant change in behavior for West End traffic. So therefore, the neighborhood traffic calming policy did not suggest any additional physical controls or physical traffic calming measures. So that's how we ended up with the traffic study. So from that, the traffic calming policy evaluation, it was determined that we needed some more data and support. So we implemented this traffic study at council direction. And this traffic study evaluated the existing traffic operation, which Trish already highlighted. Then the historical traffic calming efforts, Trish also already mentioned. And then the evaluation of suggested traffic calming measures, and then completed a software model of traffic operations and some potential next steps. And that's what we're going to go over now. So these requested traffic measures have been requested by the residents of the West End. These include increasing number of four-way stops, speed bumps, crosswalks, and enforcement of moving violations. So as you can see in this example, this is just a map of the existing stop signs in the West End. You know, more than half of the West End intersections are already stopped with four-way stops. And an example of these requested traffic measures of not maybe being able to meet the desired outcome is looking at these stop signs that these stop signs are not dissuading people from taking the West End to taking Smuggler to exit Aspen. And that brings us to the traffic operation analysis. So knowing that we have some requested traffic control measures that may not meet all of the desired outcomes, we looked at what would happen if traffic was moved out of the West End, you know, something with it like an impediment on Power Plant Road that really forced traffic to take Main Street, to stay on Main, as it were. And what this map shows is that the current congestion shown in green there is typical to see up to 4th Street, but the range of what we would expect if we pushed more traffic to Main Street is potential congestion all the way back to Hunter. At that point, you're kind of in a gridlock scenario, and traffic operation in Aspen starts to shut down. So depending on how far this congestion moves back, we'll see drivers would re-enter West End, thereby negating all the benefit that we might have seen by causing an impediment or pushing an impediment on Power Plant. We would see traffic come back into the West End to try to circumvent the congestion on Main Street.
And to reiterate, this, so imagine you're backed up like it's a parking lot on Main Street. Even though Power Plant Road in this scenario, maybe you can't use Power Plant Road, people will still use Bleecker or Hallam to bypass.
They try to get 2 or 3 blocks ahead in the line.
Exactly. Let's get, or maybe even Hopkins. let's get a few blocks ahead of line, so.
And I think it's important to note that we would also see a lot of negative consequences for this, like emergency services are now blocked from entering the West End. West End residents are blocked from getting to the commercial core. These are all negative effects.
And one thing Trish hit on, so they're going to find their way to the quickest way. So if it's backed up on Main Street, they'll go to the West End. If you do something that's major on Power Plant, 8th Street, 6th Street, 5th Street, they're all going to be trying to get back into Main Street, and that could cause more issues than what we're occurring right now. Just keep that in the back of your mind.
So then what do we do about it? Right, that's the big problem that we just looked at, but now what does the traffic study recommend? So what do they say? They say focus on actions to decrease congestion on westbound Main Street. This is intuitive, I think, for everybody, right? If we want to get more traffic to be able to leave town, keep it out of the West End, we need to make it flow better. And so that's what the traffic study recommends us do. So the potential next steps.
Yes, it does.
Any questions before we move on to these next
I was
steps?
just looking at the pond, looks a little like a bear on the.
Never realized that
riding
till
a
just
bicycle.
now. Very excited.
There's your bear.
That's great. So the potential next steps. Staff can develop physical traffic calming measures for the West End. We can look at some of the measures that probably would not have the desired outcome of reducing traffic volume. We can look at more stringent measures that would push traffic back to Main Street. Or we can focus on the existing traffic and safety related projects such as entrance to Aspen or other bicycle or pedestrian infrastructure. Or we can develop outbound Main Street capacity or efficiency concepts. So this would be kind of a holistic view at Main Street through the S-curves, all the way through the roundabout, of how can we emphasize our outbound capacity.
Okay.
And then I'll give it back to Trish here. Thanks.
So we'd like council direction on those next steps. The first question is, should we develop measures for a West End that would increase traffic on Main Street?
Are there any clarifying questions from the data you saw before we get into discussion?
The only clarifying question I would really have is item number 3, in terms of what are you considering or what could be done on Main Street, which really helps inform both 1 and 2. I mean, it kind of seems like that's the mystery door right now, and I don't know if picking number 3 means we'll fool around on the edges, but it won't make a difference, or it could make a real difference. And I mean, that's kind of where I need to know to talk about the first 2.
We can look at things as, instead of 2 lanes inbound, 1 lane outbound through the S-curves, maybe we flip it. Maybe it's 2 lanes outbound, 1 lane inbound on the S-curves. We can look at things, optimizing the cemetery lane light and limiting left turns at that light and how that, what that looks like. So we can pick off some capacity issues on Main Street, and these aren't, the flip, the 1 lane, 2 lane flip from inbound to outbound, and that would be some infrastructure, changes to be able to do that. But we could increase that capacity going outbound. So those are some ideas. If council wants us to, pick door number 3, we can come back to council with some of those concepts.
Yeah, I guess I would just wonder, we're looking at 1,800 vehicle peak hour, and I think I read somewhere that Main Street can handle about 700 before it gets congested and stopped up. How much capacity increase do you think you could get from 700 from all these measures? Maybe get up to 800 an hour, or we're not getting up to 1,800? I would imagine.
I would
don't know
suspect you're
yet.
correct.
Yeah.
And we can't really answer that here because of not
No.
knowing what the tolerance for change is at the council table either. We need to bring you back some ideas. We haven't invested in that next level of, if you will, charrette activity
Okay.
on those concepts until we understood whether that's how you wanted to spend staff time.
You know, for me, I don't think anything that's major is going to unroll quickly. It would take many years, whether it's infrastructure on Main or the second option there or anything like that. So I would love to look at what small potential measures could also increase the safety in the West End. Now, if that's going to be then increasing traffic on Main Street, I don't know if that's, but if this would develop measures for West End Street, are you talking about blocking streets off and no access and that sort of thing? So that's how you get the more cars on Main Street. I mean, for me, the bottom line is that something larger than all of our rearranging the deck chairs has got to happen. And I know that's not the direction that's been given so far, but when I think about a third to 40% of our traffic going through a residential neighborhood as an alternative to our state highway, I think it's wrong. I just think it's fundamentally wrong. And, you know, I've lived here long enough, and we all go through there at different times of the day, to know it's perhaps equally annoying at 4:30 or 3:30 or 5:30. It's not just this 1 hour that those people live with it, and they live with it all morning long. And part of it for me is I think people get into habits. And so even if there's no longer a line coming into town in the morning, but you're so used to coming in on McLean Flats Road, you're always going to do that, and you're always going to go through the West End. And, you know, people just get in a habit of, oh, I'm just going to turn behind the Jerome, go through the West End. You know, it doesn't matter that it's not backed up on Main Street right now, you know. And so that's kind of the issue I'm seeing. And so I'm really big on number 2, even though I know that needs to change, and it's going to be something that needs additional modification and improvement for today's world. But I would like to do what we can to continue to increase the safety or slow people down in the West End until that happens. And I'll look at the Main Street capacity efficiency efforts just because we're going to have something interim until the big solution really happens. You know, that's kind of where I'm coming down. So number 2 is my first priority. Do some, it's not even in there, but are there additional things, even if they're not really going to slow traffic, but the neighbors feel that they feel like they've seen something that might help? And I guess we'll have to look at number 3 as well, because it's going to be a long time before we have the funding for any sort of thing on number 2.
Are there any other clarifying questions before council gets into its conversation with each other? Thank you.
I guess I could use maybe another brief talk about the threshold evaluation, Smuggler Road at 4th Street, and there's a point criteria set up. One of the things that caught my eye was there were 40 accidents, or I don't know.
40 points, 2 accidents.
2 accidents.
Oh, yeah.
40 points, was it 2 failures to stop at stop sign accidents? Proximity to schools or other venue, I guess I just don't understand the point system here, what it means. And then proximity to schools or other public venues, I think there are some in that area, so I was just,
The Child Care Center,
I just
Red Brick, Yellow
wondered
Brick.
about that. I don't know if it deserves more conversation, I don't know, but it's in there, so I thought I might want to understand it. I just don't get it.
So this is an evaluate, so this is how we're able to evaluate when we get complaints about traffic or complaints, you know, mostly about speeding. The neighborhood traffic calming policy is really written for speeding. We've adjusted it for volumes, but that's the primary focus is about speeding. And so when you're looking at speeding, you may not hit it with your your speeds, but it might be near, like you said, it might be near a bike route, or there's no pedestrian infrastructure available. The proximity to school, I understand what you're saying as far as the red brick, yellow brick, and I guess, that we could add that. This doesn't really, like I said, it's.
Adding those is not going to change the outcome, because we already have crossed the 50-point threshold that says non-infrastructure solutions should occur. So I wouldn't focus too much on this, other than knowing we've hit past that initial threshold that says we should be looking at non-infrastructure solutions.
All right, that explains that. That's all, that's the only question I needed. I think Rachel launched into a little bit of her take on answering these questions. Ward, I think your hand was up.
Yeah. I think we don't have the luxury of time anymore on the ETA, entrance to Aspen. Sometime between 2032 and 2036, Castle Creek Bridge is going to fail. It's going to take us a long time to go forward with what we're going to do, but I think this council has to get the ball rolling on it, because if that bridge fails before we have another entrance to Aspen, the town is screwed. So I don't know how to sugarcoat it. I don't know, and I'm not going to try it. I just think that number 2 is what we really have to do. I see very minimal effects on West End traffic through any kind of interim modifications. I see the S-curves at 700 vehicles per hour as a bottleneck. So if we make increases of flow on Main Street, it's just going to slow down at the S-curves, in my understanding of it. So I've just become convinced, and Rachel's one that started this conversation a couple of years ago. We really have to look at the ETA, and I think that now is the highest priority. We've got to get something going, because when that bridge fails, we have to have another entrance to Aspen. And if the bridge was built in 1961, for 40 years, there's been a luxury of time to kick it down the road. For how long it takes to get funded, designed, and approved, we don't have that luxury any longer. So I'm a firm believer in 2.
In number 2. John.
This presentation made it pretty clear to me that the problem is we only have 2 exits out of town. And if we take one away, it's going to increase traffic on the other one. So we really need these 2 entrances 24 hours a day. I think even people who live in the West End will understand if they block traffic out of the West End, they're going to have problems getting across Main Street or having an ambulance show up. I agree with what Rachel said. It's unconscionable to have that level of traffic going through a neighborhood. And obviously, I think we're going to need not only to replace the Castle Creek Bridge, we should have at least 3 exits out of town, just in case one bridge does go out. The one under the power plant, a big flood could take that one out too.
Yeah, good.
It's not invulnerable. With that said, I am for number 2 and number 3. I don't want to create more work for you guys, but I think we need to focus on both.
Skibby.
I appreciate all this. Having the specified data and stuff is helpful. I found it to be much more confirmatory than revelatory. I think my opinion about where we go and why has not changed, but it is nice to be able to tell people that we've really looked into it, we've brought data to it, and move forward. We have a behavior and a demand challenge. That's just what it is. I look at this and I feel like we're looking at a, critically ill patient with heart failure. It's like, well, we've been really overweight, we've eaten a long time, and we're, asking questions about these sort of small interim fixes that don't actually fix. And when I say we, I mean the residents or people who are bringing these things forward, but it's just missing the big picture. Until we change that behavior or that demand profile, this is going to continue to be a problem. And I continue to think that putting Band-Aids on it or masking it does more harm than good. It either makes the problem worse in the interim, or it keeps us from understanding the problem so that we change our behavior. And so I don't support, the West End improvements. I get it, right? Like, the traffic's going to go somewhere, and it sucks a lot more to have that traffic in a residential neighborhood. That's unquestionably true. But if it's backed up past the downtown core, and the entire downtown core is a parking lot, and everybody sitting outside is sitting in those fumes and that noise, I don't think that's any better. And I can understand and empathize with why people in those neighborhoods don't want that, but it's sort of like that same patient saying, okay, I'm not gonna have any more sugar, I'm gonna replace those calories with alcohol and let the liver handle it. And I just don't think that's a good idea. I can understand why we talk about the capacity increases on Main Street, but to me, that's like putting a stint in, right? It's just going to create the opportunity for us to do what the behavior is, which is eat more, put more cars on that road until we're right back to where we were. So I just don't think that's a solution either. To me, until we change the demand and change the behavior, we're not going to solve this. And I don't want to make false promises to people. I don't want to say, hey, we're doing this and that, when we know it's not really going to work. And that doesn't mean that there can't be incremental steps that give people peace of mind or whatever, or help
Safety.
or help get into that change of behavior. I'm not like being super draconian about that, but I really don't want to make false promises. I want to just level with people. This is the problem we have and that we're going to live with until we make some very major changes. And so I do want to see that major change, as has been discussed. I think that's the only opportunity there. But I just want to be mindful. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I think the entrance to Aspen by itself is a promise to nowhere. I think it's a 10 or 15-year project that's extremely expensive, that saves seconds to minutes on a bus, but still has the same problem of everybody wanting to come in town and still having congestion for regular traffic. I just think we have to move in the direction of a non-private automobile downtown core. I think the entrance to Aspen is how we get there. That's the infrastructure that's needed. But it's like in this analogy, right? It's the gastric bypass surgery, right? We make the stomach smaller. And we say, now there's a reason, but we provide a new behavioral path to get there, right? We make sure that we have the all-electric land trains that Ward talks about coming in. We make sure that people have, on-demand transit in the core to get to the store that they want to get to and not have to circulate, and that it's all green, right? I think we need to start pitching this big vision. I think we need to start working with the community on the big vision and let people know where we're going and that it's going to take some time. To me, that's the only intellectually honest place to be with the community. And I think more people are ready for it than we think. And we know it's going to take a really long time and a lot of funding and a lot of partners to get there. So let's start having the conversation.
Can I add something real small?
Sure.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, when I said, I'm not saying number one, when I said try to help any other small ways in the West End, whether it's, more the signage, local traffic only, or watch for children or things like that. So I wasn't saying number one, first off. The second is, I just wanted to kind of remind ourselves that the most recent citizen survey, unless I'm forgetting, said that only 12% of the people who responded to the survey said leave the entrance the way it is. They were maybe split about where to take it from here, but only 12% said let's just leave it as it is. So I think that that's a real cue to get moving on some of this stuff. And final thing is that, this is really big picture stuff, like you're saying, Skippy, and I don't know that's something we would take on as a city ourselves, but I think it's time for an updated origin and destination study. That sort of thing was done with CDOT for the original EIS, for the original record of decision. But I'm just not sure we haven't had an awful lot of change in where people are going and what they need to bring with them, between whether it's a pool service truck or the air conditioning unit truck, or if it's, I used to drive a work truck. I was doing advertising distribution. So how many people are going to sites that are really not served by transit. So they're driving because I'm going to go to Red Mountain, I'm driving because I'm going to go up the pass, I'm driving because I'm going up Castle Creek. You know, how many, what is the problem you're solving for? I mean, the old study really came up with close to 70% of the traffic was generated with the golden triangle between Snowmass, Aspen, and Airport Business Center. And maybe that's still the case, or maybe that's changed quite a bit. The other thing, you know, which we're just starting to get into is how is the 1,800 cars an hour at the end of the day related to the number of free parking passes that we've been giving out, and getting a little more grip on that again. But, you know, to know what the problem is as opposed to just assuming the problem, you only get there with an origin and destination study, and they can be very expensive, you know, 500,000, you know, easily in today's dollars. But I don't know how else you start to say we have the solution for the problem we're dealing with. Or is there a way to understand how many cars are going to drive no matter what you do? No matter how much transit you offer, they got their construction tools, it's the plumber for my plumbing that went bad last week, you know, whatever. So that's just the only other two things. But I do think the entrance is a tool to somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not its own thing.
That's right. Tori, can I add one more?
Sure.
One more thing, Colombo? Yeah, just the, you know, the other things when thinking about sort of interim steps, and just saying this out loud in seriousness, I've said it joking before, but it is serious. It's not as simple as just the traffic count, the total number of vehicles. It's also what are those vehicles and how are they being used that contribute to traffic or no traffic. You know, I did a little like background lookup. We all know what a Honda Civic looked like in 1970. It was the size of this notebook. You know, average sedan size is up 37% in you know, the last number of decades. The work trucks are now half a block long. So it's a little misleading for people looking at the traffic count coming down, like the total tonnage of car. But the other thing is how people are using them. Sorry, but our drivers are in general terrible. You know, people sit at the roundabout without merging forever with the opportunity to merge. We say we have no parking, but I regularly see gaps of 3/4 of a car in the core. And I say that not to like poke fun, but to say, are there things that we could do or offer to improve the actual use of those vehicles? You know, I think about trips that I've taken to, you know, say Vietnam with a decade in between, and driving patterns in those times have dramatically changed for the better. Safety's gone up, efficiency of roads have gone up. I don't know if that's simply a society getting used to a car when ours has had it longer, or if there's been any public programs around education and use. But I would be interested in seeing, are there any other municipalities or places in the world that have done things that helped change the way we actually use the vehicles on the road that improve safety and efficiency in the way that we're talking about? I would be curious in knowing that.
Input from me, you know, I'm a little of all three of these. When it comes to question number one, you know, I still think there is room for more four-way stops. The way that I see it is you still have clear throughway from Main Street to Smuggler. I think four-way stops are great. I think they're great in a lot of places around our community. We've put in a couple of new stop signs here in the downtown core. I think those are warranted, and I think maybe four-way stops in the West End, a couple more is a good idea. When you talk about Main Street capacity or efficiency concepts, I'm for that as well. I wonder about the Cemetery Lane light, its impact on backups that continue all the way to Main Street. If there is some way to make a mandatory right turn during certain hours so that people coming off of Cemetery have to go through the roundabout, not stopping the light to go left. I wonder about that. I wonder about prohibiting the left turn off of Power Plant onto Cemetery, and that 250 car stat that you showed us that is turning to use, they're using Power Plant Road to access Highway 82. And I wonder about shutting that access off, if that would actually indeed cut that West End traffic, you know, not necessarily in half, but in a third or more. I also support lowering the speed limit to 15 miles an hour on our streets. Except for Main Street, which is Highway 82, which we don't have that control over at this time. So I see opportunities for 1 and 3, and to me, that is limiting interim actions until there are improvements to the entrance to Aspen. So I'm a little bit of all 3. And, these are always so hard to test and to implement, and especially on a temporary basis. But I'm for looking at all those. Heard a little bit different take from fellow council members, but that's where I sit with it. I'm trying to come up with some things that I think may have some concrete impact in this. A couple other things I'll say, and then get some feedback so we can be clear on direction going forward. But I agree with an origin and destination study. I agree that the fact is it's difficult and it is expensive. But when it comes to not just this issue, but also our transit for the future, if we don't identify who we are trying to impact and who we are trying to positively affect, we're not going to get anywhere. And I say this not just to us, but I say this to EOTC all the time. Anecdotally, when I am caught in those rush hour times, whether I'm going to the airport or headed down Valley against flow coming in, or whether I'm coming in when it's going, because for the most part, I just time myself not to get caught in it in the wrong way. I adjust my entire schedule around it. If I have to leave town at 4 o'clock, I leave town at 3 o'clock. If I have to come in town during morning, I avoid it. I make other plans. But my anecdotal observations is literally what I see is it's almost 50% single occupant vehicle and 50% work-related vehicles on that incoming traffic primarily. So I think that unless we know the symptoms of our problem, that diagnosing it and solving it are going to be impossible. So I appreciate what Rachel's saying about parking passes and the utilization and who are these people that are coming into town and what is their end destination and how they are parking their car, I think is part of this. The last thing I'll say is, traffic is often one of those limiting factors for a lot of where communities go and how they get there. The term that we always talk about is carrying capacity, and this is truly one of those areas where we only have certain capacity available to us. And so for me, this is one of those harbingers of where we are as a community. We, through our tourism-based economy, through our real estate and building economy that we have invited this traffic. This is the traffic that is on a daily basis at our peak times, and there's a reason, because that's when we are full, when town is busy. And that's not just the people that are here, but that's the people that are providing the goods and services that those people rely on. Even more of a reason for us to be continuing to pursue affordable housing for those that work up here in this end of the valley. So those are my comments. This is just so tough. This is just so tough to make meaningful impacts, and I appreciate the energy that we're putting into it. Talk about responsiveness, this coming forward to us, and the study that you guys have engaged in over the last 8-9 months or a year, I really think is great responsiveness. I know that West End residents are hopeful that we have some solutions for them, but we are not at this time willing to shut down public streets and make the kind of changes that the negative impacts are spread across our entire community. But I appreciate you guys looking at every opportunity. I've shared with you a couple of my kind of particulars, but I think that we should be looking at as well. With that, I'm looking to Sarah. She's got a green microphone and probably needs a little bit more clarity from us. So.
Yes, I was going to ask you to please summarize the council's direction. I've heard a lot of individual positions, but I'm not sure I've heard any coalescing around the direction other than don't shut Power Plant Road.
Thanks. I think you've heard support from a majority that are looking for not just entrance to Aspen solutions, but truly the safety and future thoughts when it comes to Castle Creek. So number 2, instead of starting with limiting interim actions, it's still to pursue the entrance to Aspen work that we've started. I did not hear, I mean, I put forth a couple of specifics for West End street measures, 4-way stops, possibly prohibit the left turn at power plant and cemetery, and lowering the speed limit to 15 miles an hour. I don't know if there's support for looking into those and getting more information for those. I'm just looking down at Ward. I don't know what he feels like.
Well, ultimately, what I feel is that we have a limited capacity of what the staff can do. And for the need, I know that there are behavioral changes and there are all kinds of other things that do with the entrance to Aspen, but I would like to see an emphasis, a real emphasis on staff towards an entrance to Aspen.
So no 1 and no 2. I mean, no 1 and no 3.
Yeah, I see that there's minimal gain to be made by 1 or 3. Yeah.
Okay. Rachel, clarity on your?
Yeah, I would look at the 2 things you suggested about the left-hand turn back to Main Street off of Power Plant Road and the potential of a no left turn into town during certain times of day on Cemetery Lane, so that light could remain green longer. So I would be willing to look at those things, which I would categorize under the efficiency concepts. You know, what it would take to go back and forth for the 2-lane, 3-lane, I think would take a lot of engineering and a lot of staff time, as you're saying, and whether it would be a big gain in time or benefit, it's more of a Band-Aid, a new Band-Aid. And I know I don't want to back up traffic onto Main Street, but if there's if you're wording it differently, are there additional safety measures that would help alleviate the concerns of the neighbors there that may or may not be effective? We know people don't read signs necessarily, but sometimes you feel better knowing it's there, that, slow down the children in our neighborhood. We see people put up their own signs sometimes and their own little things out on the road. But again, really pushing forward with number 2 is what's most important to me. And if we were to do an origin or destination survey, I'd like to see that it would fit into any sort of EA or update to the EIS that could count, so we'd get double duty out of it. And this is just a kind of a side note for observation, but we're talking a lot about traffic exiting town. If we were talking to the people coming into town in the morning, we'd be hearing a lot of different comments about what we need to do. And they suffer from that end. And it's a different suffering, but it's a lot of the employees who decide, I think I'd rather work in Elgibel for $40 less a week, but not have to deal with this anymore. I mean, that's where number 2 takes care of far more need than just what we're concerned with the West End. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarity. John, and then Skippy.
Yeah, I would support lowering the speed limit in residential areas to 15 miles an hour. I look at my speedometer when I'm going through town, and I almost never am going over 15 unless it's on Main Street or Highway 82. Yeah, this is a really tough one because there are no easy answers, and I don't think we're going to be able to change behavior, at least not quickly. And the solution is many years away, really. I think our most important thing we can do is try to speed up the entrance to Aspen process. And I would be interested in looking at capacity or efficiency concepts.
The interim, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, not interested in 1 or 3, not don't support the lowering speed limit. I would look at the left turn solutions or the banning of left turns just to see what that is. That look might be a very quick no based on staff's input, but I'm happy to look at that. Those seem like small input solutions that could have a big output. So I'm happy to look at those. Yeah, I'd like to focus attention, as was said, on the bigger picture solution that is a transformed downtown core enabled by an entrance to Aspen. The other thing that I haven't heard, and maybe it's just implied, is from staff's time, I really want to see staff communicating all of this back to the community, back to the West End, back to the broader community, and leveling with them and saying, look, we really did take the time to be responsive. We really did our homework. This is what we learned, and here's why we're not moving forward with these things. So I just want to make sure that all this work doesn't go into the abyss for those who asked for it, and I think it should be an opportunity to kind of, just bring the public up to speed of this is a really intractable problem, and until we have a big solution and a behavior change, we're not going to solve it.
Thanks. So, number one, less support. 2, people are still interested in continuing and maybe accelerating the work on entrance to Aspen. 3, item 3, yes, there is a desire to get more information to look at lowering speed limit and this efficiency concept that may involve Cemetery Lane in some way.
I just would like to follow up on Councilmember Mesereau's comments about information to the community. It will be an informing conversation, not a dialogue. So we will post the information, but there's really, we'll answer questions for understanding, but we need to be clear up front that it is not the intention of the engagement with staff to change the direction that's been given tonight.
Just to clarify my own thoughts or what I'm suggesting, I'm not looking for a two-way street where we're asking people to give us solutions to things that we're not going to follow. I'm not looking for that. What I am looking for is an active informing where we're going out to the people that have been part of this, letting them know, similar to what we did at Park and Park, really following up. If informing means we post the link to this to the website, I think we haven't done a good job. But if it actually means actively going out and informing the community actively in a way we know that we'll make it in front of them, I think that'll be good.
Is that the council's request? I'm just asking because of resources, so I know what to prioritize. Thank you.
When I heard that request from Skippy, I thought it was appropriate, but what I'm thinking is the West End Safety Council or whatever traffic council group named themselves, if we email this agenda and pack it to them directly and maybe do a high-level summary, because, what this really did for me, and I think for others, as you said, with the data coming in, it's an 1,800 an hour at peak problem. This is what it is, and to be able to explain why some of the other measures, such as closing off Smuggler or making it a one-way, would make your life worse in different ways. And that's why we're not doing, with the conclusions type of things we've reached. But I agree with Sarah, this is not a new dialogue, it's not a new debate, but it is potentially the direction we're trying to move things forward for a long-term and permanent fix. And these are things we may be able to do in the short term. We're going to continue to look at. And this is the real context of the problem that we understand now, and we've done the work, the due diligence. That's how I would envision it.
Yeah, in answer to Sarah's question, and we've allocated or budgeted money for entrance to Aspen education. I think the number of people that are in town now, they're probably only 20% of the people that are in town now were engaged in previous studies and have prior knowledge of all the different options that were discussed and dismissed. But I think it's important that we have a document that shows, that summarizes all of the attempts and ideas for entrance to Aspen and what led us to the record of decision and where we are at this point. I don't want to have to go and have a year of people saying, well, why don't you try this, when it's been tried by previous attempts. So just in summary, the education and presenting what has been tried so that we can move forward without having to have as much rehashing of old stuff.
On the entrance to Aspen or on West End?
Entrance to Aspen.
Okay. Her question is about West End outreach.
Communication from this meeting.
Communication.
I think I have clarity. We'll do probably like a Facebook Live or virtual presentation of the data that people can come in and can access. But I don't foresee us sitting down and going over, like spending time with tons of one-on-one meetings with individual residents or interested parties over this traffic study.
Yeah, agreed. I think Rachel's suggestion of just an email follow-up to that specific group would be great.
Yeah, they kind of disseminate the information pretty well.
Trish, to your team, do you have any other questions or clarifications that you need?
To be clear, the left-hand turn on power plant and no left-hand turn into town, those are the components of number 1 that
No, they're
we've
the
got.
components of number 3.
Or
I think we
3.
can, let's,
Okay,
I do not want those suggestions to limit staff from looking at maybe some other thoughts that we've talked
Okay.
about that are premature to mention tonight.
okay.
That we know those need to be on the list of what we look at, but there's probably more we should be.
Okay.
Your Honor, if we're finished with this, can I put something out? I think that the downtowner, we need to revisit that, and it's nowhere on our long-range schedule how we can better utilize the downtowner, to start thinking about that for, I guess, after budget, because you look at the most recent long-range schedule, and we're already into the budget season.
Go ahead, Pete.
We are locking that down in November to discuss the mobility options and that last mile that you're looking at. It's very popular, even through all the feedback we've had over this summer. That one's wildly popular.
Very good. Thanks for that. Thank you all for the hard work on this tough problem.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Cool.
All right, with that, we'll conclude our work session. Council is back tomorrow evening for a regularly scheduled meeting, which starts at 5 o'clock. And of course, we start off with citizen comments. So if anybody has any desire to address council tomorrow, please join us at 5 p.m. We hope to see you in the room. Thank you, GrassRoots. So I was texting you last week.